Benjamin Impossible. Chapter 15. Dinner Party. Benjamin and Captain Lemon-Time walked through the crowd of robotic partygoers. All around them, the robots chattered and moved about, forming little groups and gesticulating with their arms.
"This party is excellent,"
one robot said in its monotone voice. It sported a top hat and carried a fancy black cane. Another robot, wearing a dress and holding a parasol umbrella, agreed with an equally robotic voice.
"What a fine day for a party. Dr. Glockenspiel has outdone himself."
Benjamin looked around. There were robots everywhere, talking in little groups. From time to time, a robot carrying a tray would approach and offer refreshments.
"Would you care for a refreshment or snack?"
the robot would drone. "Not really," Benjamin answered. "I'm trying to cut back. By the way, you don't actually have any drinks or snacks on your tray, dude." The robot continued talking.
"What a fine day for a party. Dr. Glockenspiel has outdone himself."
"I guess," Benjamin said. "He's certainly won the Weirdest Party of the Year award." Captain Lemon-Time looked around nervously. "This is really odd, Benjamin. These robots appear to be in some kind of loop. They keep saying the same things over and over, and their fashion sense is about a century behind the times." "Yeah," the boy agreed. "The men are dressed like magicians, and those giant dresses make the women's butts look huge." Captain Lemon-Time looked down at the stroller he pushed. The hyperhelium generator still sat inside, safe for the moment. "We followed Dr. Glockenspiel's directions. Now what do we do?" Benjamin looked around, assessing their options. "We need to find my brother. I say we move closer to one of the walls. I don't feel comfortable with robots on all sides of me like this." The captain nodded. "For once, I agree with you. Let's move over there, near the musicians." Benjamin and the captain moved through the crowd of automatons. As they walked across the grassy field, more waiters approached them, offering non-existent refreshments. They eventually reached the robotic musicians, who sat in a close group and read from sheet music. The robots held violins, cellos, and other stringed instruments that Benjamin couldn't identify. Their robotic arms moved bowstrings back and forth in time with the music, but Benjamin could tell that they weren't playing their instruments. The chamber music came out of a hidden speaker. "Hey!" Benjamin exclaimed. "These robot musicians are faking it. Their sheet music is even upside down. What a rip-off!" "No surprise there," the captain agreed. "This entire party is a sham." "Hey, look up there," Benjamin said, pointing upward. Now that they were closer to one of the inner walls, they could see figures marching along the upper parapets of the fort. They were robots wearing the white sailor uniforms that they had seen earlier at the boat dock. Each of the robotic sailors held a bundle of balloons suspended above. Every few minutes, a robot would release a string and one of the balloons would fly up into the air, lost from sight. "More sailor robots," Lemon-Time said as he attempted to adjust the visual options in his helmet. "And they've got balloons. Very festive." Benjamin nodded. "Probably stolen from one of those factories that burned down. I think those balloons are filled with hyperhelium." "How can you tell?" the captain asked. "Well," Benjamin said, trying to think of a good way to explain this. "Hyperhelium has a lifting force several magnitudes greater than normal helium. You can't put much hyperhelium gas inside a regular balloon, or the rubber will break as it stretches upward. You can see that those balloons are small, only partially filled, and extremely elongated along the vertical axis as if they are stretching upward." The captain studied the balloons for a while. "Okay, that kind of makes sense," Benjamin continued, studying the balloon sailors. "I'm guessing those balloons contain a partial mixture of helium and air." "What makes you think that?" the captain asked. "If they contained 100% hyperhelium, that robot would be flying away by now. At the very least, a small gust of wind from the ocean would push the robot off the wall." "Oh, good point," Lemon-Time conceded. "Seems like a waste of hyperhelium, though, letting those balloons fly off like that." A trumpet call rang from the main entrance. "Hey," Benjamin said, "I think something is happening." The white-faced Major Domo robot walked to the top of the stairs at the main gate and blew his trumpet again. The musicians stopped and all the robots in the courtyard looked up.
"Esteemed guests," the Major Domo droned in its monotonous voice, "it is my pleasure to introduce the host of this marvelous party. His maritime exploits have forever changed the field of deep-sea exploration. His accomplishments in robotics are second only to his impeccable moral rectitude and humility as a man of science. I present to you the most esteemed, world-renowned Dr. Heinrich von Glockenspiel.
The robots clapped with enthusiasm, and the orchestra played a boisterous battle hymn as a figure appeared on top of the battlement walls, standing high above them. Dr. Glockenspiel stood tall and looked down upon the throng of robots below. The sky was at his back, and the sun illuminated his uniform in blinding white light. Reflections bounced off the medals on his jacket, and an ornate sword hung at his side. The only part of Glockenspiel's uniform that wasn't white was his polished black boots, which were cut high up his legs and looked more appropriate for a man on horseback. "Wow," Captain Lementime said. "That is quite an entrance. Look at that guy. He looks like an ancient admiral from the Spanish Armada." Benjamin squinted at Dr. Glockenspiel. "Something looks odd about the good doctor." "You mean besides the fact that he's wearing an ancient naval uniform and waving at a bunch of robotic groupies dressed up for a Renaissance fair?" "No." "Maybe you're jealous of his giant, perfectly coiffed mustache." "No, not that," Benjamin said, annoyed. "I'm trying to scan his heat signature and I can't get a good signal. Maybe it's interference from all the fancy medals and ribbons on his chest." "Hush," Lementime said. "Glockenspiel is about to speak and I want to hear what he says." "Welcome, guests," Dr. Glockenspiel said. His voice rang out deep and powerful, obviously amplified by a speaker or PA system. "Today is a fine day to be surrounded by such a fine group of comrades. We are on the eve of a momentous event that will change our lives and the balance of power on this planet. In a few short hours, our journey will begin. This endeavor will rock the preconceptions of man and forever change this ball of mud we call planet Earth." As Dr. Glockenspiel spoke, he walked forward with his arms outstretched, stepping off the edge of the high wall. Instead of falling to his death on the stonework below, he floated there in the air. His legs kept moving, however, giving the illusion that he was walking down an invisible staircase from the heavens. "Neat trick," Captain Lementime whispered. Benjamin shook his head. "It's just hyperhelium. He must have secreted some of the gas in his suit to keep him afloat." "Probably," the captain agreed. "But look how well he pulls it off. He looks like he's leaning on an invisible balcony now. You never looked that graceful flying through the air." "Just a bunch of circus tricks. Next, he'll pretend he's a mime trapped inside an invisible box," Benjamin grumbled. He hated to admit it, but this Glockenspiel had style. Dr. Glockenspiel, still floating in the air, spread his white-gloved hands outward toward the audience. "But before our grand adventure, let us remember those who came before us, the visionary scientists who paved the roads of progress and helped us build form out of chaos. Sir Isaac Newton, who codified the forces of gravity, Madame Marie Curie and her discovery of protonic radiation, and most recently, Professor Jonathan Impossible and his hyperparticles." "Hey, your dad made the list," Lementime whispered. "Hush," Benjamin said. "He's not done." Glockenspiel held up a gloved finger and looked around. "Long have great minds like these impacted history and bettered the plight of man. If we are great today, it is only because we stood on the shoulders of these giants of the past." Dr. Glockenspiel's feet finally reached the ground, and he continued his speech without missing a beat, his boots flattening the grass as he stepped forward. "I have always wondered what it would be like to talk to one of these great visionaries in person. What insight might I gain from their towering intellect? Would that I could be a flea upon their backs and fly with them above the world of mental mediocrity." As Glockenspiel moved through the crowd, the robotic men bowed and the women robots curtsied. "Hey, he's coming our way," Lementime commented. "I can see that, dummy. I have eyes, too." Dr. Glockenspiel came close and paused, one hand resting on the pommel of his sword while the other stroked his mustache in contemplation. "It is a pity," Glockenspiel said, a sad expression on his face, "a pity that so many of the great minds were killed by their own discoveries. Galileo, the world's most famous astronomer, blinded himself with his own telescope. Marie Curie died from the very radiation she sought to study." Dr. Glockenspiel stepped forward and leaned close to Benjamin, his grinning mustache reflected in the boy's mirrored face shield. What do you think, Professor Impossible? Will you be another great scientist who dies for his invention? Not a chance, dork, Benjamin replied coolly, poking a finger into the chest of the uniformed man. By the way, your costume looks stupid. Glockenspiel straightened and stepped back, surprise on his face. Wait a second. You're not Professor Jonathan Impossible. What gave it away, dum-dum? Benjamin asked. You're right. I'm not Professor Impossible, and I don't negotiate with your kind. With those words, Benjamin swung his metal club down and crushed Dr. Glockenspiel's head in with the deadly steel mace. You've reached the end of Chapter 15. Please leave a like below if you are enjoying the story. Then continue to Chapter 16, Puppet Master.